Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Grow Great Live. I'm your host, Ria Lala, and with me are my two co-hosts, Antonia Dodge and Mariana Pollack. And today we've got something really awesome in store for you. We're talking about sex and how to talk to children about sex and everything we wanted to know. Now, for parents, this can be something that can be very challenging. So we want to dive right in and give you lots of tools and techniques that you can use and really explore this really important topic with our kids. So let's begin. Antonia, Mariana, where do we start? Talking to kids about sex. What are your thoughts?
I think this is such a delicate topic for so many people because there is a lot of potential trauma that comes up and surfaces around this topic. Sex is such an intrinsic part of who we are. It's such a part of our identity. Even if we don't want to think we have a tendency, I think, as a culture to either diminish its importance and go, oh, sex doesn't matter. You know, in a marriage, it's all the other stuff that's important. Sex doesn't matter. Or we overvalue it, like it becomes everything. And so finding that perfect balance of, okay, so sex is actually quite important to us. It's a big part of our identity. Our sexual identity is a big part of our identity. So we don't want to diminish that, and we don't want to discount how important it is in how we see ourselves in a relationship with other people. But at the same token, we don't want to make it sound like it's everything and give an impression to our children that it's the only thing that they should be thinking about. So how do we communicate with our kids in a way that we don't diminish its importance within us as individuals that see ourselves in a certain way, but at the same time, we don't oversaturate them with this idea and help them grow up too fast, lose their innocence too quickly. I think that's a big part of what parents fear, is that our children are going to lose their innocence if we start, talking about this subject. So it can be a really murky field. It can be an area where they're just not sure how to handle it. And of course, one of the best things, or not one of the best things, but one of the most common responses to not knowing how to handle something is just not. Like, we're just not going to talk about that, right? Like, we don't talk about that in this house. And it's not usually because of the kids, it's because the adult has no clue how to deal with it. They don't have a comfort around it. And so it just feels like a really, I was going to say sticky subject. I probably shouldn't say that, but it becomes a really difficult topic for people to engage in.
Yeah, totally it is. I come from that kind of household where it was not discussed. And even if it was mentioned, or any kind of kissing going on, seen on TV, it was quickly diminished as something that we don't talk about, and something for later that I had to figure out on my own, basically from friends and reading books and things like that. And it actually made me realize how important it is to relate to my children later on in life, and probably not have them go through that and not knowing and having to figure it out, because now it's a different day and age than when I was growing up. There's much more technology out there, even though you can control as much as you can. The internet access and everything, it still gets out there. And if anything, I would not want them to get I don't want to say wrong information, but maybe something that will, like Antonia said, have an imprint on them that it's not necessarily healthy. And more so than anything, the question is, when do we do it? What's the appropriate age? How do we do it? What's the conversation? Do we, start easy, or, just right away, go to nitty and gritty of it? And who does it, in the household? Is it the mother? Is it a father? Is it together? So I think, there are a lot of questions around that. And I really hope we get to answer all of them today for you.
Mariana, you brought up something really important about the fear and the uncertainty that a parent feels about when and where and how. And, that part, for example, if I talk to my kids about sex, this is a big fear. Will my kids want to have sex now that I've talked to them about sex? Will they be curious, and where will that curiosity lead? That's a legitimate fear that parents have. Mm-hmm. Another very legitimate fear is that, okay, if I'm the one who's going to bridge this conversation with my kids, now they go to school, but not every parent has bridged this conversation. It depends on where their comfort levels are at. So if my kid goes to school and their teacher or a child hears, and they know that it's come from my child, what does that say about me? So judgments about your child, yourself, that comes into the mix. And so our own uncomfortability about other people's perception of us is going to affect, what we're doing. So with all that there, what is the right thing to do? One thing that I'd like to proceed this by is most of our fundamental beliefs are created when children are children. Like there's a saying that give me a boy until 7 and I'll give you the man. So who we are, how our mind interprets the slightest remark, the slightest eyebrow glance, every experience, every socialization that our child has had up until these like crucial age where neurons are firing and pathways are being created in a way that will never be replicated in their life, that is going to inform them how they see the world, how safe they see it, how comfortable it is, how much shame they feel, how their ease in conversing about different things. So I'd say the first part is definitely recognizing that yes, we have these fears, but also that this is a very, very crucial time for the children, and we want to make sure that whatever we're putting into their minds, and whatever they're, not even what we're actually saying, but how we're showing up, is something that allows our children to grow and develop in the way that supports their highest development.
Yeah, my experience has been that, I see this overarching theme that if I address something or acknowledge it, suddenly I'm condoning it. If I talk about something with my child, now I have somehow given them the message that this is something that you should be doing. And I feel like, I try not to make hard and fast, like comments about how things should be. And I recognize that we're all a little different. But my experience has been that is the polar opposite of how reality works. When we don't address something or acknowledge something, that's when the child has a much, much higher chance of going and trying to figure that thing out on their own. And it's as if we condone them to do that. It's as if we said, you know what, I'm not going to actually be the person who guides you in this particular thing. And so since you're going to learn, because you can't not learn, learning is a big part of, it should be a part of every adult's life, but it is what a child's primary job. Their primary job is to learn how the world works. So if you don't address things, it's as if you've given them the rubber stamp to go figure it out on their own. It's as if you've condoned them doing it, learning through trial and error, because you didn't address it with them. So it feels really counterintuitive. It's as if like we don't talk about this kind of thing, so then that means that we don't condone it. It's the reverse. If you don't address something, if you don't talk about it, that's actually when you're condoning them going and doing it.
I'll just stick in there, all the studies show that for the parents that don't talk about it, because kids know far earlier than we even think that they know. We think our kids are really innocent, and no, my kid doesn't know about that, and they haven't seen, I haven't exposed them to, but they do. And all the studies show that if you expose your kids to this early, the chances of them going about the trial and error way decreases significantly.
Yeah.
So
what is the age? What do you think is the right age?
So so if we look at what children tend to, and these are just guidelines because they're going to be kids that have different maturity levels and different experiences, but generally between 2 and 3, a child is having a very strong awareness of their body. Like they're just, they want to play with their penis and stick their hands down their pants and, pull out flaps and folds that they've got. Like that's what they do, right? They just feeling around and figuring things out. And at that point in time, as a parent, us giving our children language around their body parts, let's face it, there's a lot of uncomfortability with just using the actual terms. Let's just start there. Using the word penis and vagina is words that for a lot of men and women just feel like, so we have a lot of pet names. I've had a pet name that we've used in the household without using that. So I thought it was cute, but I have to also confront, is it my own uncomfortability with using the word? But at 2 to 3, they're touching bits and pieces, and they should know the actual anatomical name for the parts of their body, because we wouldn't call an eye something different than an eye. So why would we call a penis something different than a penis, right? Whether you choose to have a pet name is fine, I think, but that's everyone's discretion. But it's interesting to just explore why we're not using the term. So 2 to 3, exploring the body. From 3 to 4, what happens, or I'd say from 3 to 5, kids want to know, like if they see somebody pregnant or they want to know where they came from, they have an understanding that a baby came from a mummy's tummy. And at that point in time, they might have a question like this. Well, how is a baby made? How did the baby get into your tummy? And one rule of thumb that I tend to advise parents on is never avoid a teachable moment. They're not asking you about sex in that moment. How did you have sex? They said, how did the baby get into the tummy? So give them an answer to that question. Well, for me, I started off with a YouTube video when my kids were 3.5. Like, it was a really beautiful YouTube video of the sperm going up the canal, and then they went inside the uterus. And so I just explained, well, there's this a sperm. It looks like a little tadpole, and it finds an egg inside mommy's belly, and then it connects, and then you have a baby. A baby grows. It could be as simple as that. And the next stage is from 6 to 8. That's where it gets really interesting. That's when kids start to want to know a little bit more details about sex. And at that point in time, because I'm a big believer in not creating any uncomfortability and shame, and I would explain to them what happened. So for my kids, I said to them, well, essentially there's a penis and a vagina fit together like pieces of a puzzle. And inside of a penis is something called sperm. They just look like little tadpoles. Now, of course, every parent's going to have their own way, but this is what I said. And it just swims up a canal, and it finds an egg inside of mommy's tummy. It's in like a sac called a uterus, and they join together, and slowly lots and lots and lots of cells start to build out, and then a baby grows. But and then going forward, what I would recommend at least is there'll be questions about sexuality. There'll be questions about, they'll see things in the media, or their friend will be talking about it, or they'll be interested in a girl at school, or they'll be talking about why are those two girls holding hands, or why are those two guys holding hands. And at that point, use your discretion about how you want to discuss that. But on my 2 senses is never miss a teachable moment to tell your kids where it's at if they're asking the question.
I think one of the most important components to that is you become a source of safe information. You're now a person, like, I've seen the contrast. Actually, my parents were an example of the contrast between being willing to be open about information that was potentially taboo versus not knowing what to do and just freaking out and creating shame around it. So I actually had the contrast in both my parents. And my mom, who was the person who was totally willing to talk, who was totally willing to sit down. In fact, she told me that her mother never referred to sex in the home, and she never told her anything. And then when my mom got married, because she was of that time period where you don't have sex until you're married, when she said it was all like really uncomfortable, it was really scary, like the whole thing was just it wasn't trauma inducing, but it was all very difficult and complex for her. Like she hated that moment of just not knowing. And so she said, I'm never going to do that to my kids. So if my kids ask me where do babies come from, I'm going to tell them. So I think I was 4 the first time I said, hey, where do babies come from, right? And so she sat me down. She's actually a decent artist. She sat me down and drew the whole thing out. She drew out the male anatomy. She drew out the female anatomy. I knew what the vas deferens was when I was 4. Okay, I was 4 and I knew what the vas deferens was. Yeah, no,
so
seriously.
Lucky.
So fortunate. And she talked about how like the blood goes to the penis and it gets hard, and then she like had the little illustration like move up. And I mean the whole thing, right? And I'm like 4, right? And so I'm like, "Oh, okay." I mean, she might as well just sat me down and show me how a cake was baked. Like, I didn't care, right? Like, I was like, oh, that's okay. That seeded my curiosity, and off I go play. And then I remember about 6 or 7 months later, I was like, hey, Mom, you drew me that thing, but I don't remember. What was the part that, and I just had like some question about anatomy, right? Like female anatomy. And so she sat me down and went through the whole spiel again. And at that point I went, oh, okay. All right, cool. And then I went off and played again. I mean, I was like, oh, that's how cakes are baked, right? Oh yeah, I remember. Okay, you put the flour in at that point. So that's all it was to me. And so I had this very, my mother was safe. If I had a question about a boy saying a word at school, if I had a question about how people thought, like if they said naughty words or if they insinuated something that I thought sounded wrong, my mom was the first person I went to. I was like, Mom, they're talking about this and this and this. What does that mean? Right? I remember somebody using the phrase tight, that a girl was tight. And I was like, Mom, what does that mean? And she's like, oh, okay, well. And even though she was uncomfortable with it, she was my safe space. I went to her with all of those questions because she had never created any shame in me at all. She had never created any doubt. And so she became my safe haven, and the lines of communication were totally open. So then when I became older, and she had a lot of, she had a very she had a sense of morality or ethics around sex, morality around sex, that I don't necessarily agree with as an adult, but I still respect her position. But at the time, she was the mom and she got to make rules in the house. And so when I became of age as a teenager and I was getting really sexually curious, and like there were boys and, what do I do here? I still felt like, even though I knew that it was not, as far as they were concerned, it was not okay for me to be sexually active while I was living in the house. That was their role. And that could have very easily turned into a rebellious situation for me. That could have very easily turned into a situation where I was like, well, I don't have to listen to what you say. But because we had such open dialogue my entire growing up experience, when it came to that conversation, we sat down and talked about it, and this was their moral stance, and this is how they felt. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, you bake a cake this way, and I'm not allowed to bake cakes until I get out of the house, right? Like, I mean, it was just very open and free. And so I think that was, in my mind, I mean, our parents do some stuff like completely, ass backwards, and our parents sometimes do things just spot on right. And that was one of those that I'm like, I'm going to replicate that. I remember thinking as a teenager, I'm going to do exactly what she did. And because I had always felt so safe talking to her. And so I think that's one of the big fears that parents have, is that if I start talking to my kid, I'm going to expose them to something they're not ready for yet, and they're going to run and do it. And I mean, I know that this is just an anecdote. This is just my personal experience, and it's not going to always be 100% this way. But my experience was that it was the opposite. My experience was that because I had the ability to have open dialogue with my parents, or at least with my mother, now, whenever I had a curiosity or wanted to go a direction that I didn't know whether or not I was ready for, she was a safe place for me to go be a sounding board. And so she had far more influence over me and my sexuality throughout my teenage years than she would have ever had before. Like, her influence over me and my sexual experience was probably about as plugged in as a parent can be. And I think that's what parents want. They want to have influence. They want to be able to guide their children so that they don't make bad, like, choices that traumatize them, that they don't make irrevocable decisions that they now have to live with for the rest of their life. They want to have influence over their children over that. And I think maybe that's the difference between control and influence. When we try to control the information, we try to control our children's behavior, they're going to go do what they can get away with when they're teenagers, when they have that level of self-direction. But if you have influence, right? Like, if they're coming to you to get influence over their decisions, that's a level of power that, I mean, I think that's about as high a level of power as a parent can hope to have. And my mother had that perfectly because of how she chose to go about it. So at least for me, I'm very grateful that I was raised in that context. And that was, I mean, I'm like that I'm going to do that. I'm going to replicate exactly that experience.
So before I put my 2 cents in, how are your drawing skills? Can you draw?
Not as good. But as Rhea mentioned, we have the power of YouTube. Let's go look at those tadpoles on YouTube.
There you go. Well, I feel, based on what both of you, Rhea and Antonia, were talking about, what I agree with, and that's how we run it in our household, it is absolutely perfectly normal to talk about it. It's normal, just like Rhea, you said, it's a part of the body. And it's there, and it's going to serve us. And they get curious about it at their different ages. And, I can maybe pick up where you, Rhea, left off, by the age of 8, because your older one is 8, right? Yes. So my younger son is 8, and my older son is almost 13, going to be 13 in March. What I've noticed is that the younger one is growing up much faster than he would have if he didn't have a older sibling. So he's already, educating himself on many different things. And the car conversations, which we talked about before in our previous episode, and that's already happening. And he is there, and he's, getting that by osmosis. And I think he's totally ready for that. So that being said, I don't know how he would have done it, because the older one at age 8, he totally did not care. It was just one of those, boys and girls, and, boys don't like girls, and, vice versa, different phases of the life. What we did have we started having it. What we decided, what we decided is that we will talk about it when they are ready, when they show different interests. And, it was always we were always there to answer the question. What they also were watching was the Brain Pop video series that on the internet that, within quick minutes, they give appropriate, that's also a subjective view, point of physical development and what's happening in puberty and all of that. And then that's when actually they started asking right questions for their age, I would imagine, in their development. And now they're actually talking about it in school, because my son is in 7th grade, and they're talking about reproduction, about periods, about different things. And he almost daily asks me, the older one, what is this? What does it mean to go on your period? What is sex? What is getting different, going to puberty and physically changing. So we're getting into that now. And another point that I want to mention is that the WHO talks to children about it. We never said, oh, it's going to be you. My husband Ivan never said it's going to be me because I'm a man, and I can relate to boys better, or I can explain to them. Or it was never me saying, no, I'll do it. It's whoever is available for a question at the given opportune moment, that person answers that. So, and there's no such thing as an expert in the house. We're all, experts, I guess, in it, to the different level. So whoever they feel like asking in that certain moment, they do, and they come to us, and we do the best we can to, again, with the premises of it is absolutely normal to talk about it. So I think if one of the things that, parents will, take away from this today's episode is that it's normal. And if it doesn't feel normal, then maybe, they can look deeper, within either the upbringing or the culture or within themselves, what makes them feel that it's not normal, or it's a taboo, or it's an unmentionable thing in the house. And how will that affect them and the relationship with the children and their children growing up and having healthy relationships later around sex, healthy relationship with their partner, and healthy relationship with their children as well.
Yeah, beautifully said, because we want that for our kids. We want them to one day find the person that they love and to have a sexual experience that is very nourishing for them. And even just thinking about sex in general, people have sex for all different reasons. Kids are having sex for maybe for possession, or for bragging rights, or for whatever. There's so many different reasons why people have sex. But I think that those worries that parents have, it's really important that I think the consensus definitely is that look for the teachable moments. And there's not this one moment where you have to talk about sex with our children. You can have many moments. And based on how your kids interact with not just their age, but their maturity level and what they're exposed to. Mm-hmm. To talk about this, though, without getting into, which I think is really a great time for parents to confront the fear that parents are feeling. Just to touch upon what you said, Mariana, the fear that they feel about what could happen if I open up this Pandora's box. And just explore that for a bit. So if we look at the subtleties so when we weren't exploring cultural or religious reasons or our upbringing as to why we have hesitation and anxiety in talking to our kids about sex, what's important to recognize is, a majority of our interactions with people is nonverbal, okay? So 80% of how we're communicating is through a nonverbal way. It is through the slightest lip curl. It is through the slightest eyebrow twitch. And so once we start realizing just how much information we're letting out to our children before we've even opened our mouths, we start to recognize that, well, if our kids' nervous systems are tied to us, because they are, their nervous systems are tied to us. I mean, not literally, but their animal is tied to our animal. That's why this whole idea of a child being with us, they're already sensing whether mommy's stressed, whether mommy's nervous, whether she's anxious, whether she's afraid. They get that. So now we have to look at if we are going to bridge this conversation with our kids, how do we do it in a way? How do we show up in our everyday, like while we're getting dressed or when they ask the question, so that our nonverbal cues and our verbal cues are in alignment, are congruent with what we want to offer our children, which is to not have a sense of shame or fear about their sexuality. And so that requires us to be very present to everything that we're not even saying. So one way that I think might be a great idea is to do some prep work. Sit in front of the mirror, talk to your husband or a friend about how you would convey this if the children were to ask. And then the more you do that, just like the more you practice anything, is the more comfortable you get at having the words come out of your mouth. Because if you can't say the word vagina, and it's like with the thing down there,
the vajayjay,
yeah,
then the kids are going to pick up on all that, and they're going to know, okay, something's making mommy kind of like a weirdo right now, and she just freaking out, and I don't know what she's freaking out about. Oh, so Antonia, you didn't have that experience. Like it was like baking a cake. You do this, this is what this does, and this is how it goes. And you're just like, yeah, okay. And you go off and you do your thing. And how can we, like, that was a beautiful experience to be, information to be transmitted to you that way. So how do we parents embody that? But that has to be done in the pre-work. That's not done on the fly, because on the fly, if you're not prepared for the question, like my son blindsided me. He said to me, Mommy, what's sex? Now, I know that I don't want him to have shame, and he's seen me naked so many times, and we've even bridged these conversations, but I literally nearly choked on my orange juice when he said that. And then he instantly followed that with, because Logan wants to have sex with Ava, and they were 7, and I'm just like, whoa, like this kid's in grade 1, and just to give it like a little 2 cents of what I did in that moment, because I wasn't immediately prepared. The first thing I went to, and I'm glad I had the presence of mind to do this, was, that's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. Mm-hmm. And then I knew I had to regulate, because I didn't want to clutter up the space with any crap. Mm-hmm. So I said, hang on, let me just put my plate away and my glass down. And in that moment, I did my regulation, which we can talk about later, but I did my emotional regulation. And then I instantly went into, what am I committed to and what do I want to transmit to him? And in that little moment of my little timeout, I was able to get my thoughts together so that I can come back in the way and show up the way I wanted to show up. Otherwise, if I was like, like, Porky Pig at the end of Bugs Bunny, that's all, folks, it would have been totally weird, and it wouldn't have been alone. So, yes.
Yeah, well, and we've talked about this before, that kids will mirror back to you all of your garbage. And what's great about that, the concept of running drills is great. Like, prepare by looking in the mirror and talking to yourself about this subject. And if you do it in a mirror, you're going to see all that stuff literally mirrored back to you. All the tripping points, all the points where you're feeling very uncomfortable with this subject, like you're not really sure how to broach this. I think, though, that you mentioned before, and you said it so casually, which is awesome, that we don't want to give a sense of shame or fear to our children around sex. But I don't think everybody feels that way. I think people utilize fear and shame around sex in order to control their children's behavior. I think they utilize a sense of shame around sex so that they're transmitting this idea that it's not okay, and if they can instill in their kid a shame around it, then their kid won't do it as a teenager when they're not ready for their kids to have sex. So I think it goes even one more layer back, which is, you mentioned how you had the presence of mind to say, okay, what is my ultimate end game here? And your ultimate end game happens to be that you want an amazing adult that has amazing relationships with other people, right? That will have a lovely, wonderful, amazing sexual relationship with a woman in his life, or whatever gender he chooses to go for. But I don't know if everybody has that baseline. I think they utilize shame and fear as behavior control.
I have just the perfect rebut to that, and that's this. Where in someone's life have they used shame to change a behavior? If someone can show me where they've used shame, like, you better stop doing that, or even done it for themselves, some version of shame, where has it ever changed a behavior? Then if they can show that to me, then I can say, good, use shame. But you can never. The only way you can change a behavior, be it in yourself or with anybody is not by going, look at you, oh my God, that is so wrong. It's by loving it into submission.
Yeah.
So unless
Yes.
you're to love something into submission, both for yourself and for your children, you're never going to change anything.
Nope.
And accepting that part of you.
Yeah. Really passionately about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. But I think one of the reasons why we think that technique will work is because our behavior is altered by shame. If we internally experience shame around something, it will change how our relationship with it. And so I think because it works inside of us, if we feel shameful about something, we won't have permission to go for it. It's usually an omitted act. If we feel shame around something, we'll omit it within us.
It's not a fundamental change.
Oh no, no,
it's a change.
It's
I want to look good. It's not really a change.
We're stuck. Like we feel stuck. Yeah, absolutely. It's not authentic. I would agree with you. It's not authentic behavior change. I would totally agree with that. And yet, because we see our behavior being influenced by the concept of shame, I think we overvalue it as a strategy. I think we think this is a legitimate strategy to keep our kids from doing the stuff we don't want them to do. I totally agree with you. But I think it needs to be, I think that a light should be shone on that component. I love that you're so passionate about it, and it's not gonna work. like trying to control your children's behavior through shame is simply not going to work, because they may or may not pick up on exactly the form of shame that you're experiencing around it, or the form of shame that kept you minding your P's and Q's. But that said, it will jack them up if they feel shame around this, because having sex is a basic physiological need. Okay, it's like eating, breathing, sleeping. Sex is so intrinsically a part of our biological, it is arguably why we exist as a human species, is the desire to procreate, right? Like, just as intrinsic in getting food, right, and releasing those toxins into the wild was a part of how we have existed as a human race, having sex is how we've existed as a human race, how we've evolved at all. So it is such an intrinsic biological need that if we start infusing it with concepts of shame and fear, it's not like the sex need is going to go away. It's just going to distort it. And I've been reading so many books lately. I've been kind of obsessed with criminal profiling lately. And one of the things that I've seen over and over and over, and not that you're turning your child into this, so I just want to make that caveat, but one thing I've noticed over and over in sexual sadists and people who do crimes against other people that have a sexual motive is their relationship with sex is so warped. They have so much shame and inadequacy around sex that they have to dehumanize another person in order to feel qualified to have sex with them. Like, it's not that they just want to hurt that other person. It's that they have so much shame within them that they can't experience the sex act, something that arguably every human being that has the capacity to do will act out at some point in their life, because it is a need like food. If they have all this distorted trauma and shame around sex, they'll have to dehumanize somebody in order to have sex with them. So it's not like you're going to change their behavior in preventing them from doing it. What's more likely to happen is that you're going to change their behavior in how they end up doing it, right? Like, the shame will simply distort the act. It's not going to prevent the act, it distorts the act. And so I think that's why it's so important to remember that shame is not a very good control tactic.
No. And in some cases, it will go totally opposite, to the total other extreme. Because we've seen times and times again, a good Catholic raised, not to diminish any religion or anything, but something that is really rules oriented, raises and grows up and goes into the porn industry, say, or ends up on the totally opposite spectrum of sex before marriage. You do it only for the procreation or whatever it is that that the rules are happening. So it's and I actually watched the documentary that one girl was saying. She said that I needed to express myself so much and the body and sexually and everything, because I felt that part was so shamed. That part of me was so shamed and so pushed aside by my parents and the grandparents and everybody in my family. And she said, I felt like I was in a cage. And once I got out, I just went totally full out without actually understanding what are the consequences of it. consequences of other people, passing judgment, or consequences of, even more shaming, because, she went from shaming of not expressing herself enough to shaming from expressing herself way too much. So I absolutely agree. Having it be normal and talked about in a way that you want him to have it, and not be, full of shame about it, will shape them into the individual that you want him to be, which is a well-rounded individual who sees it as a normal thing and doesn't have shame around it, and doesn't have any, affect, psychiatrically or mentally or anything later on in life.
Yeah. I'm thinking about somebody who I really just love and respect as someone who's a child behavioral psychologist, and he's a doctor, Dr. Gabor Mate and Gordon Newfield, who talk a lot about the attachment need. And what's really fascinating about the attachment need is as a parent, even hearing this and listening to this, there may be triggers where they go, okay, I know shame doesn't work. I'm hearing you say shame doesn't work, but I'm just so worried that when my kid turns into a teenager, or maybe even earlier, they're going to try things and they're going to do things. And so we've all spoken to what some of the data has shown. But Gabor Mate has worked a lot with troubled youth. Like he's interviewed thousands and thousands of children. And one thing that has been kind of a meme that exists in certainly Western societies is the idea that once our children become teenagers, we lose them. They're off with their friends. Of course they want to hang out with their friends. Of course they're going to be influenced. They're not going to want mom hanging around anymore. I'm not going to have as much control. There's that worry. And when the kids, like right now, while our kids are still like 7, 8, 9, we can still have some control over them. But when they get older, we got to make sure we set a really good foundation. Otherwise, who knows who's going to guide them. So this idea of a peer-oriented society is accepted as a norm. But what he's saying is that is a fallacy that we have. That the idea of adult-oriented societies exist on this earth, where even though the child has grown up to be a teenager, they still have a natural hierarchy where they are consistently looking for to the parent or to the elders for their influence and for their guidance. Yeah. And so if we think about that, then, well, how the heck do you get that? How do I create in this peer-oriented society, have it be much more where I still stay at 13, 15, 18, well, 18, they're an adult, but as a great influence and guide, so that I don't leave my child in the fickleness of a boyfriend who might like them today and not like them tomorrow, or a girlfriend who's saying something nice today and rejects them tomorrow. How do I keep them? Because I know that my love and my centering is going to be as good of a guide as I can offer, because our love is unshakable as parents. And so really the 2-second version of that is this. Every moment that you're interacting with your child, and by the way, just for the record, as parents, we don't always get it right. We're just trying to do more times than not. But every moment that we're interacting with our child, the way we create closeness and connection, the way we handle it when our children are afraid, when they're feeling nervous, when they see how you react to something and we give them answers and we explain things to them and we question and we're curious, every moment where we can choose to create distance or create deeper intimacy, that is what is the cornerstone for when a child is 13 and 14, where they look to you to guide them and not go towards a friend. And there's so many different ways that parents can achieve that, from the ritual they have when they're saying goodbye to the ritual when they come back. There's a number of different things that parents can do to build that. But I think that's really important to speak to, because that is a fear that parents have. I mean, Antonia, would you agree? I don't know. What do you think? Is there a fear that parents have about what's going to happen when they have less, when they're a teenager?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Well, and I mean, I think of when you're talking, I think of Stephen Covey's dependence model that he mentions in Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about how we naturally, with relationships and even ideas and concepts, but we go through the cycle of dependence, independence, interdependence. And dependence is when we over rely on that relationship with a person. And we're told, as children, we're totally dependent upon our parents. And then we go through a time period of independence. We're trying to figure out who we are as an individual. And so we break that need to have their approval at all times, every moment. And then when we become complete and whole people, then we move into interdependence, which is I'm a complete person, you're a complete person, and now let's have the relationship we need to have. And I think that time period of independence in a child's life is so, because we're so used to our kids being dependent. We're so used to them coming to us for permission on everything, checking in, making sure that they get our approval. We're so used to that dynamic that when they move to independence, which is a time period where they're trying to figure out who they are, what their values are, where they're coming from, right? They're trying to become whole, complete people, which they can't do while they're in the dependence phase. They can't do that, right? Because they're totally looking to you to tell them who they are. When they go through independence, I think we think that that's what that phenomenon of the peer oriented, like they just have no desire to be around us. They have no interest in us anymore. They're just going to fly off and be their own little birds, and we can't do anything about it. And what they're doing is they're trying to discover who they are so they can move into interdependence with us. And you see those interdependent relationships with adult children and adult parents that are so awesome, where they love each other, they have mutual respect. There's still going to be that parent-child relationship to some extent. I still look to my parents as a source of wisdom, right? I still do. So you're always going to have that component. But it's more healthy. It's a more interdependent relationship. And I think that independent phase, we think is we're losing them. When really all it is they're figuring out who they are. But they're never, just because they're going through a time period of self-discovery, that doesn't mean they've lost touch with everything around them. That doesn't mean they've lost touch with their parents. They're moving towards interdependence, which means they're always going to have that relationship with their parents. They're always going to have that respect. And as you're figuring, I mean, I'm 37, right? And I've gone through a massive trying to figure out who I am phase in my life in my 30s, right? Like I went through a massive independent phase in some pretty strong, powerful ways. And it wasn't like I wanted to be floating out in the middle of the ocean without any help, right? It wasn't like I was like, so well, screw everybody and everything. I'm going to figure out who I am in a vacuum, right? Like that's not what I went through. And I don't think teenagers want to go through that either. They don't want to figure out who they are in a vacuum. They don't want to like say, screw everybody and everything and I'll go figure out who I am independent of you. The only reason I believe, or my speculation is the only reason they full out reject their parents is if their parents cannot understand the dynamic is changing. If their parents keep trying to cage them back in a dependent phase, that's when the teenager goes, well, screw this. I got to figure out who I am regardless. So I'm going to completely disconnect from you because you won't give me the room to figure out who I am. But if a parent follows that cycle, if the parent goes, I appreciate and understand you're going through independence. I appreciate and understand that I'm going to create some space and room for you. You'll see that kid checking in with you constantly, right? Because they don't know who they are, right? They need you to help them figure that out.
That does require some pretty savvy skills on the parents'
It
behalf to do
does.
that. It's like, you give them room. There's so much stuff going
Oh,
on there.
tons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to figure that piece out. But I think that's what's going on for them. I think that's why we go, well, you can't do anything. They're going to go have sex and they're going to go drink and smoke and do all the whatever the nightmare scenarios are for parents. They're just going to go do that. Well, it's not that the independent phase necessarily leads to that, right? It's not that independence necessarily leads to rebellion and anarchy. It's that independence means that we have to figure out who we are in a variety of contexts. And if we can pick up those skills enough as parents to create some space to go, okay, so you went and messed up, right? What did we learn from your major mess up, right? As opposed to now you got to now you're grounded and you have to check in with me every moment and we've got a curfew and you can't do anything self-directed again because I can't trust you, right? And now we push them back to the dependent phase. That's when they're going to get more and more, disconnected to continue that self-discovery piece.
I I think that when they say we're losing our kids to puberty or losing them to teenage years or anything, it's a part of not taking responsibility. It's kind of easier to say, oh, I'm going to lose my son or daughter to teenage years. And I think that by the same behavior that we're exhibiting, which is not talking openly about sex or politics or education or religion, we're in a way pushing them away. Because if I don't have an open conversation with my boys, I know they will go somewhere to find that information that they want. So it's not that I'm losing them, I'm in a way pushing them away. And I know this is kind of extreme, and it might rub some people, off the wrong way. I know Antonia is here for that, but, I'll take the role today.
Yeah, I'm the person that's supposed to be offensive.
But I think that will definitely happen with them. It's, I had times and times conversations about, let's say, they will come to me and say, what's the difference between Democrat and Republican? So I will explain to them, and I try to do it in a totally neutral way so that I can have them decide on their own who they want to be. So we had a conversation about politics. Okay, this is what they're about. This is what the other side is about. And they will ask me, so who are we? And I said, we are whoever we want to be. I'm not going to push anything on you. Okay, so religious, atheist, what's up with that? Well, this is what's happening. Are we religious? Well, we are whatever you want to be. Sex, gays, everything that they came to me with, I had them make their own decision, what they want to stand for, who they want to be, and shape them into that. So they know that I'm the, source of knowledge. I'd like to take wisdom too, but, I need, some growing up myself to do. So every time we had a open conversation that they can get information from me, they were there. Do I have them go and consult other resources? Of course, because they want them to be educated as much as possible. And I feel that in a way, they will come to me first, or my husband, for information. And that way, I'm hoping really that once they do reach those years when they're like wanting to be independent, they will still, come back, which I see it's already happening. They are coming back, especially the older one, because he knows that I will give him the open and honest perspective on some things. I will not push anything on him. And definitely not want him to, be shaped the way that I, see for him. He's shaping his own self. And I think that's very important. So, just parents take responsibility. It's not that you're losing him to anybody. Nobody's like fetching people, like there's a teenage god who's fetching teenagers and kids and, you're losing them. It's about keeping them. And I think it's your responsibility, just taking the responsibility for that.
Yeah, beautifully said, ladies. And so I'd love to start giving some parents some hacks on this.
Let's do it.
Yeah, one of the hacks that can be used for many different things, but certainly for conversations around sex, is that I'd like to share is to recognize how do we recognize what are the things that trigger us? Because we might think that we have no triggers, but how we show up to other people, as we know, can be very different than how we perceive ourselves. So one great way, if we're talking about sex, and this can be with anything, is you write down some of the words. So write down the word sex, write down the word penis, write down the word vagina. It's just like an interesting exercise that you can do with your partner in crime, sitting at the kitchen table when the kids are in bed. And write down, it could be even words like selfishness or pornography or whatever it is. And in it, when you write the word, sit with the word, and your job is just to look at the word and think about what feeling is evoked in you. Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling like a strong reaction? Like sometimes when I give this to some of my clients, the word selfishness might evoke a reaction in them. And that right there can be a window into their mind as to, well, why is selfishness? What is it about their life, their upbringing, their socialization that has such a strong thing when they see selfishness, which is really important because if they see it in their kids, they might be doing something that will, which is suboptimal because you just have a really strong emotional reaction and feeling towards selfishness. But to do with sex, write those words out and then just sit with it, be still with it for a bit, and then try and articulate, what feelings are coming up to somebody or just to yourself. And that should give you at least a nice, good intro into where your uncomfortability might lie. So that would be just one little thing you can do. And certainly, while you're at it, if your partner's there, role play it with them. And every time you stumble and every time you're trying to find the word, go, oh, why did I stumble there? What made me feel uncomfortable about saying that? Or that will be very informative. So that would be one hack that you can do, or exercise that you can do that might be very helpful.
I want to piggyback on that and refer to what we talked about before. I don't know if this is what you had mentioned, Ria, but I think that I think it's really powerful, even though it's going to make you feel really stupid. So if you do it, you're going to feel dumb, but do it anyway. Rehearse what you would say to your child in a mirror. Like, seriously, I've noticed that. And whenever it's recommended that people do mirror work, like they do work when they're engaging in a mirror, everybody always feels like an idiot, right? They're like, why am I looking at myself? Why am I doing this by looking in a mirror? And yet, the reason why we feel like idiots is because we have literally mirrored back to us all of our stuff, right? Like, all of that stuff that feels really bad and icky, like, we get to watch it happening in real time. So that's why we feel like idiots when we do it. But it's one of the most, I think what's one of the most powerful things you can do is to rehearse something in a mirror and watch yourself. So it's basically the same technique that you're talking about, which is writing down words and feeling the stuff that's coming up for you as you're writing down these words. Say them out loud to yourself, reflected back to you, and then watch your face. Watch where you have a stutter. Watch where you have like a, like what's the resistance you're experiencing. And if you can get to a point where you can say the whole thing in front of a mirror, and you have no compunction about discussing baking the sex version of baking a cake to your child, then you probably have got it down. You're probably okay. And then finding tutorials, finding things that, if you're not an artist like my mother was, you can find tutorials and things that will help guide you through the experience on YouTube, etc. I think that's really powerful too.
I would say look at the relationship, sexual relationship with your partner. How open and honest are you with your partner when it comes to sexual life? How open and honest are you and expressive of your desires, and he or she is of their desires to you? And it comes a lot around because whatever we're open with another person, which is our intimate partner and the most important person in our lives, that's how it's going to be portrayed to the children as well. Because children see, they copy. They're not going to do what we say; they're going to do what they see. And it a lot depends on your intimate relationship with your partner, how they're going to grow up and have their own intimate relationship with their own partner. So if there's a lot of openness and honesty there, it's going to be probably much easier for you to discuss sexual matters with your children. If there's not enough openness, then ask yourself why. What is it coming from? Is it within me? Is it because of my environment, my upbringing, my parents? I actually had to think about it because my mom, we never had any kind of talk. Like I said earlier, it was a taboo. So I had to do almost like a perceptual position exercise, which is when you go into somebody's body and mind and mentally, emotionally really, really connect so that you can see their point of view fully. And I went hypothetically within her to see what was the reason, why she didn't talk to me about it. And what I got is that nobody talked to her about it. Her mom she grew up with her grandparents. Her mom moved out when she was very little. So not that only that she didn't have anybody to talk to about from her own family, she grew up later not even surrounded by a lot of information that was coming either from the media or she did read books and everything. It was just a plain not knowing how to do it because nobody helped her do it and help her realize how important that's going to be later on when she does have children of her own. So that understanding that it made me think, okay, so I'm basically on the crossroads. I have my mom on one side and my father who never discussed it with me, and then I also have my children growing up in the age of information and developing fairly quickly than all of us developed in our respective generations. And I thought to myself, so who am I going to be here? What's my role in this equation? So I decided that all the shame, taboo, not being open and honest, just kind of like a heavy burden that was coming around it stops with me. I'm going to be the agent of change who will, start off with open and honest conversation about sex, and hoping that that will happen, trusting that that will happen later on in generations. So just, see the what's your relationship with your, previous generations, and I mean with your parents, and then when your husband as well, and draw for that, and see how you wanted to see it the way you want it to be, and act on that with the exercises, like Ria, you said, which is, very powerful. And also Antonia, when you see yourself actually doing something, when you're watching yourself, it's a very, very powerful reflection, and what comes back, and it's a learning opportunity for sure.
Definitely love the idea of looking in your own intimate relationships,
Yeah.
as Mariana, to have that inform you as to where your uncomfortability lies.
Mm-hmm.
Even but one thing that's, I think, a really important life hack for us to share with our listeners is the idea of, okay, so we've recognized there's some anxiety, we've recognized there's some uncomfortability, we've recognized that, okay, yeah, I do have some shame around that. And so now you go from that to, it's not like a switch. You don't go, okay, I see it, and therefore I'm just going to conquer it, right?
No.
The way we operate is we go, okay, I feel it, and I'm feeling uncomfortable here, but I don't want to feel uncomfortable because I know this is not what I'm committed to. Okay, but what do I do with all this uncomfort? And then here's this is a bit something that I'd like to offer, which is when we talk about emotional regulation, it sounds like a really big word, but what we're really doing is, how do we calm our nervous system such that, our heart rate is down, our body feels relaxed, there's not tension all over our body, so that we are in like a really calm, grounded, neutral place, right? And if that feels really strange, like there might be parents out there, especially with young kids, that might go, I never feel in that place. I don't know what that place is. But if you can think back to maybe you took a yoga class, or you went for a massage, and there's a place where you just feel like solid and you feel good and you feel calm, that is, emotional regulation is being able to just calm all that system down. And so there are pathways to do that, but there's actually a whole process involved. But I'm going to give you some of the basic thing to do in order, the minute you see you're feeling, somebody blindsides you with a question, like your kid, or you're feeling something as you write down a word or as you're talking it into a mirror. And that is, the first thing is go into your breath. So what I recommend is do at least a 3 count in through your nose and a 6 count out through your mouth, and have it sound like the ocean. So it's something like this. Your breath is going to be the first thing that's going to help calm your nervous system. And then there'll be different techniques that people use. There's not just one way, but there is a process that really involves something somatic, where you're getting into your body, you're looking for sensation, you're midlining, you're grounding yourself to the earth. There's lots of different ways you can do it. You're not tied to one. But I just want you to have something in your arsenal. If you're feeling anxious about something, what do you do with it? Go to your breath. And if you forget everything else, breathe. Take a little time out and do deep breathing, like deep belly breaths, to calm yourself down so you can show up, use your higher thinking brain, and show up the way you want to for your children. Mm-hmm. And that's whenever you're triggered.
Yeah, well, and I think what's great about that is, especially if we have acclimated to feeling frazzled, as in like feeling frazzled is how we normally feel. What's really great is the understanding that what you're talking about, that emotional regulation, it's a muscle just like anything else, and the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. So it becomes like Mr. Miyagi's wax on, wax off training. Like you just keep doing it, and eventually it becomes natural, right? Like he waxed on and waxed off, and then all of a sudden he's doing karate, right? Like, right, he was waxing a car, and now he's doing karate. And so if you can incorporate it into your life and other stuff, then when the big stuff hits, like the sex talk, right, that's the karate moment. But you've been practicing waxing a car, so now you have the muscle memory to be able to pull on it. And I think that that's what you're talking about, Ria, and then incorporating that into all areas of your life preps you for the moment when the big one hits. So not implementing it just in those big moments, but implementing them in all the little moments throughout the day. Like anytime you feel frazzled, anytime you feel like I'm just not able to handle this right now, and you do your wax on, wax off training, then you're ready for the big games, I think. One thing I wanted to mention, I know that we're probably getting ready to wrap it up, but one thing I wanted to just check in on is the thing that wasn't clear to me, and if I was watching this, I think I'd probably want this information. What specific age did we talk about talking to your kids at? And I just want to get a general consensus. What age do you think is appropriate for the sex talk to happen?
Okay, I want to proceed this because every child is going to have different experiences. Like, just look at Mariana. Mariana has a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So, your 8-year-old is being exposed to much more now with the 13-year-old brother than when the older one was 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, definitely.
no hard and fast rules with this. But if I had to just, my 2 cents is whatever the question that is led by the child, whatever that question happens to be. So if they're 4 and they want to know, how did the baby get into your belly? That is a moment where they're not asking about sex. They're asking, how was a baby made? How did a baby make? Give the information that's relevant to their age group. So how a baby's made from 4 to 5, well, you can tell them exactly it's a sperm and an egg and it comes together and it fuses. They're not looking for the intricacies of a penis and, inside of a vagina and it's releasing sperm. So use your best judgment. That's where you have to use your intuition. But at 2, if my child's asking about it, I'm going for it at 2. Mm-hmm. And so, we talked about the different age groups though, but Mariana, what do you think?
I agree. I totally agree. They, when they're ready and when the question comes, that's the appropriate age, no matter what it is, because that's the appropriate age, because the question is appropriate for whatever their level of development, cognitive is.
And curiosity. That's where the curiosity was at.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Curiosity. And also what I mentioned before, who is doing, because a boy might come to a mother or a daughter might come to a father, whoever is available at that point, it's the right person to answer the question. It's not, go talk to your mother about it. Different people feel differently about that. And that is, again, totally fine. So appropriate age is when the appropriate question comes up. Appropriate person is to, answer that question when, it comes up. And like you said, use your intuition and feel into it. And just keep in mind, the more they're exposed to information, the more free internet, technology access they have, mm-hmm. the question will come earlier.
Yeah.
It's given. Or depending on the school, also their friends, who they're surrounding themselves with. So those are, little agents that are coming into when actually the question will come.
I think because the age is context dependent. I think there wasn't like a hard and fast when we were talking about it, which is why I wanted to review it just mm-hmm. really quick. It's when it organically comes up for the kid. If you have a shy kid that it doesn't, or like they're not comfortable asking those questions. I think for me, if my child, I have the little hellbeast child from, Napoleonic doom in my household, so there's no way that she's not going to self-direct everything in her life, including all of her questions. But that said, let's pretend I had a really shy kid. I think that I would broach the subject with them. If I wasn't getting the question, I think I'd broach it with them by 7. I think 7 would be my cap. By the age of 7, if I hadn't gotten the question yet, I would say, hey, so let's go have a conversation about something. And I wanted to check in with you guys and see if that feels about right to you too. If the question isn't organically coming up, I personally would address the question by 7.
I would absolutely agree with that, because I think between 6 and 8 is mm-hmm. that's when they start having the questions.
Yeah.
Like that's the age range for more detailed questions about sex, like how the baby actually got in there. Yeah. So big believer in that. Yeah. Broach it if they're not asking.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would even go back. I would even go back to if they're not asking about the parts of their body, and they're 4 and they're calling it something that it isn't.
Yeah.
Do we want kids that are 5 and 6 calling it something that it isn't?
Their choice. The tinkler.
They know what the real name is, right?
Right.
Well, guys, this was a fascinating subject, and people are going to fall on all different levels of the spectrum, but certainly I think we provided a wealth of information for you to at least consider as a parent, and that's what's important. So thank you so much for listening to this episode on sex. We've loved contributing and talking about it, and we'll see you next time.